Hi, I'm Chris Lee, and this is Virtually Speaking. Joining us today is Dr. Natalie Nixon. She's been called the Creativity Whisperer for the C-Suite. She's a speaker, consultant, and a strategy, foresight, and innovation expert. Natalie is the author of the critically acclaimed and multiple award-winning book, The Creativity Leap: Unleash Creativity, Improvisation, and Intuition. She's been featured in Forbes and Inc. magazine and contributed to Fast Company. Seth Godin said that Natalie helps you get unstuck and unlock the work you were born to do. In 2021, Fast Company named her a world-changing ideas honoree, and Real Leaders named her a top 50 keynote speaker in the world for 2022. A hybrid thinker, Natalie consistently applies her background in cultural anthropology, fashion, design thinking, and dance to advise leaders on unique approaches for process transformation and to leverage creativity as an innovation resource to more rapidly achieve priority business goals. So please join me with the awesome Natalie Nixon. Well, hello, Natalie Nixon. Thank you for joining me here on Virtually Speaking. How are you doing?
Hi, Chris. I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to talking to you. I've been really enjoying getting to know you. You are just a wonderful breath of fresh air when it comes to one of my favorite topics, really, which is creativity. And there's so many, ways that people come at that topic. But obviously, I know there was a publication or media that named you the Creativity Whisperer for the C-Suite, which I really liked. I liked that. And then, of course, your awesome book, which is an award-winning book called The Creativity Leap: Unleash Curiosity, Improvisation, and Intuition. And one thing people quickly get to know about you, which I also love, is that you love and were inspired a lot by jazz.
Yes, absolutely. My dad was a big jazz head and he learned to play the acoustic upright bass in the service. He joined the Air Force right out of high school.
Mm.
And I grew up listening to the catalog of Blue Note records that he owned and had collected over the years. At the same time, my mom had studied and trained to be an opera singer. So I also had in our home a lot of European classical music. So our home was just a music haven,
Right.
R&B, jazz, classical, and it's become I continue to have a soundscape wherever I go in my life.
Right. And so you didn't become a musician, though. Did you tiptoe your way into it, or did you think I just want to listen to it? How did that conversation go with
So
yourself?
my intersection with music is through dance. So I've studied dance since I was 4 years old, and I liken music is to dancers what I don't know what a frame is to a visual artist painting. And so dancers always will kind of wait till the end of a movie credits to understand who did the score because dancers love finding those gems of musical compositions that help them tell story through movement. So I studied modern dance, danced in college, danced a
Wow.
little bit afterward in New York City, but like for like 2 years, not really long at all. And the challenge with being a dancer is that if you don't continue professionally, you are kind of SOL in terms of the options to continue to take class. So there's either classes for 13-year-olds or for the professionals who are trying to audition. And what
Wow.
I have found and really focused on in the past 2 years is ballroom dance, and that
Mm.
and hip hop is my go-to now.
Oh, I love that. That's great. And so, do you dance at all during your keynote? No, I'm just kidding.
Not yet.
Well, maybe I just came up with a new idea. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think you need to because your keynote is so awesome and everybody is so transfixed and the reviews are always through the roof for you. Tell us, when did you start looking at creativity in the business world and in that scope? Obviously, this was way before you wrote your book, but when did you start combining the knowledge for music and dance and creativity with the business practices that we go through at work?
Well, it's interesting. I have an incredibly loopy background, which I found myself constantly defending through my 20s and 30s, and finally settled into understanding that I just have a loopy background. So I have a background in cultural anthropology, fashion, dance, academia. I'm a qualitative researcher. So I started my company, Figure Eight Thinking, really as a side hustle on the side of my academic practice. So I was a professor for 16 years.
Ah,
And I gave a TEDx Philadelphia talk in 2014, which catapulted me into going to companies to help them develop cultures of innovation. And so
what was
that
that TED Talk called?
that TED talk was really was about how the future of work is jazz, and it was 7 tips for improvising at work.
Oh yeah, that's the one I've seen. I really like that one.
Thank you. Thank you. So I give this talk. I start getting invited into organizations to help facilitate, advise, and speak about improvisational organizations. And I was doing it so much that my husband
Right.
John said, "Babe, this is like a thing. You should formalize it." So I did, and I created Figure Eight Thinking. Again, totally a side hustle until I looked up a year later and realized I was having more fun with my side hustle.
Hmm.
And in 2017, made the decision to leave academia and build out Figure Eight Thinking full time. And I've not looked back. But what was happening is that the majority of the engagements that I was invited in to do were to help build these cultures of innovation.
Hmm.
And in the hallowed halls of corporate America, rarely do we utter the words creativity. But what I was observing is a couple of things. Number one, we didn't all have the same definition of innovation, and we ended up talking over and around each other. So that was a challenge.
Hmm.
Secondly, I was observing from my experiences that in order to consistently and sustainably innovate as an organization, you actually need a capacity for creativity. The challenge was that if I had led with creativity, they would have looked at me like I had 3 heads, because in most organizations, especially in corporate environments, when you say creativity, people think of dance, music, theater, sculpting. And I realized I needed to really develop a simple and clear and accessible way to explain the connection between creativity and innovation. Here's how I see the connection. First of all, the way I define innovation is that an innovation is an invention converted into scalable value. And that value can be cultural value, financial value, social value. But how do you go from an idea, an invention, to an innovation? The conversion factor is creativity. And so what I landed on was this idea that creativity is our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems and produce this novel value. And that converted later into the book, because I really, Chris, use a lot of my speaking as ways to prototype ideas. And as I was developing these ideas, people would come up to me after my talks and say, "That was amazing. Where can I learn or read more about it?" And I quickly realized I needed to summarize and distill all that I was thinking about into a book, which turned into the Creativity Leap.
Right, and you're also a contributor for at least Fast Company. I know you've been featured in Forbes and Inc. magazines as well. So you're obviously a thought leader in this space, which is so exciting to the people who hire you, and for me right now to be talking to you. I think that I think that it's great that you have looked at it differently, and you realize the word creativity might not be the best foot forward into talking in corporate America, because they're just not going to get it right away. So it's
Not at
really
all.
about inventing. And when you say inventing, you're talking about, is it a strategy? Is it a product? Is it a solution? What are we inventing?
So yes to all. I mean, one of the areas in my background is design thinking.
Yeah.
And so design thinking is a problem solving process. And one of the things that design thinking offers is that you can design not only tangible objects like furniture and dresses and garments,
Yeah.
but you can also design the intangible. You can design experiences, you can design processes and services. So similarly, I I really look at my role as an advisor in organizations as I do a lot of acts of translation, right? Because sometimes when my clients are in the midst of their work in financial services or in healthcare or in technology, it's understandable that it's hard to kind of zoom out and
Right.
see the forest for the trees, and you
Right.
get so into the weeds. So a lot of what I have jokingly said at the start of a lot of my keynotes that my husband says that one of my superpowers is my ability to fall asleep anywhere. Like I really can fall asleep just about anywhere,
Oh,
which is
that's
an
really good
amazing.
because you're on planes a lot.
I'm on a place ladder, exactly. So that's a great superpower. But my other superpower is my ability to help people think differently about the ways that they think, and
Wow.
specifically to help leaders in organizations where they're feeling a bit stuck to think differently about the way they think. And the reason why that matters is that for most of these organizations with whom I'm working, they're churning and they're putting out a lot of fires and they're in kind of a reactionary mode. And I learned from Esther Perel, actually, I love
Wow.
Esther Perel, that creativity is the opposite of being reactionary. I mean, think about that. When you're being reactionary, you're doing a lot of copy pasting, but to be creative means to be super generative. And so to be able to help them pause, to zoom out, give them tools, frameworks, facilitate ways for leadership teams to think differently about the ways that they think is golden for figuring out how to innovate, how to disrupt, how to shift. And sometimes the shift, it doesn't have to be monumental. Sometimes it's a really small tweak in the way that you've gone about delivering a service, a process, or an experience. It's very much what I say inside out work.
Yeah. And I love what you said about the reactionary versus the creative approach because the reactionary also seems to me like it's a little bit angry, it's a little bit scared, it's fearful, it's circumstantial rather than the changing process being an opportunity and something that's hopeful and
I
filled
love
with,
that. I
right?
love your insight about that. I really agree. A lot of the direction I'm taking my work next is I'm really building out these ideas about wonder and rigor, improvisation, intuition, curiosity, to think about flourishing and to think about how do we flourish in what feels like unprecedented amounts of change. Of course,
Right.
every generation feels that way, and probably in every century, people
But
have
we
kind
have
of,
more change than anybody right now.
we
It really
think we
feels
do.
like that.
It does feel like that.
It's amazing.
So the question, I,
In every area, from sports to work to government. I mean, everything is just let's start over. Let's change everything. Let's go back to the way things were, 50 years ago.
speaking of going back, don't you find it kind of interesting? I've been thinking a lot about this, how we've made a big deal about how in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, how are we going to make sense of this hybrid workplace and
Right.
working from home, which has a whole host of challenges. Do not get me wrong. I
Sure.
understand it can be incredibly nuanced and complicated. But what I started to think about is that it's actually a relatively new concept that we wake up in the morning, we travel miles away from our home to go
Mm.
to work. For centuries, in more agricultural economies, you wake up in the morning, you do your ablutions, you eat some food, you cross the threshold, and boom, you're at work.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I work from home. And so I wake up in the morning, I do my ablutions, I have something to eat, I cross the threshold, and I'm at work. So,
Right.
in some ways, this is something that as humans, we've been in this place before. And I think
Interesting.
what's really interesting is thinking about how do we flourish in the midst of a lot of ambiguity, where there's a lot of blurred boundaries. And I think one of the answers is something I learned working in the fashion industry is to zig away from when everyone else is zagging.
Right.
What I mean by that is we have a tech crush right now. Everyone is in love with technology, be it AR, VR, robotics, Twitch, whatever it is. Um, and that's cool. But in my view, the organizations that are going to flourish and thrive are the ones that understand how to work at the intersection of productivity, technology, and meaningful human connection and
Mm.
meaningful human experience. And one of the ways they're going to do that is by really making room for the capacity for all of us to be much more creative in the way that I'm defining creativity, right? Not just picking up
Right.
a paintbrush, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but thinking about creativity in terms of that capacity for wonder as well as for rigor.
Yeah, I love that. So, I'm really interested in finding out what was it that you were teaching when you were a professor, and then where were you teaching, and then also what were you doing in fashion? Because these are both really interesting jobs that you had that lead you to be who you are today. So I'm sorry to go backwards here, but I'm just curious, what did you teach and what did you do in the fashion world?
Great questions. So, before I was a professor, in my 20s, there was a 5 year chapter where I was a middle school English teacher. And
Wow.
I only half jokingly say that was probably the best setup and experience for everything I've gone on to do. Because
Uh-huh.
when you're a middle school English teacher, you must have an incredible sense of humor about yourself. You must love learning. You must be very improvisational, a good researcher, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But the teaching chapter as for 16 years as a professor, I started out the first 10 years I taught the business of fashion. And that's because I had my background in fashion was as an entrepreneurial hat designer. I had a small business called Nat's Hats, when I was a much younger woman living in New York City. And then after that, I worked for a division of the Limited Brands.
Mm.
It was a company called Mast Industries. It still is around. Actually, my former boss, Jim Schwartz, is now the president of Mast. Excuse me. And at Mast, Mast is the sourcing arm of the Limited. Well, it was primarily the sourcing arm of the Limited. And sourcing is the side of the fashion industry where you figure out how to make a t-shirt at the highest quality, lowest cost, and shortest lead time.
Hmm.
And what that meant for in a world where now the cost of labor is cheaper outside of the United States
Yeah.
is that this was a company that had a lot of strategic partnerships around the world. And that took me to live and work in Sri Lanka and Portugal, making bras and panties for the Victoria's Secret brand. That was the account that I was primarily focused on. And it was just life changing
Right.
because fashion is an industry that most people really underestimate. People either think fashion is really glamorous or they think it's really frivolous. And it's neither glamorous nor frivolous. It is a business. And I learned working in fashion to appreciate having a financial acumen, the role of technology and logistics, but also the role of beauty and desire and aesthetics in building consumer insight. Fashion is so good at figuring out what we desire.
Mm.
And if more industries operate in that way and got
Mm.
into the consumers' heads in that way, it would be
Wow.
a game changer. In academia, because I love ideas, I love learning. So essentially, I got paid to learn is really how I looked at
Yeah.
that chapter of my life. Started out teaching the business of fashion for the first 10 years. In the middle of that, I naively decided to earn a PhD while working full time because I thought it's just a big paper at the end, so let me try it. So I ended up doing that, did it in 4 years, and that's when I started studying improvisational organizations through the lens of jazz music. And I was also exposed to the field of design thinking,
Right.
creativity and strategy, design strategy. And I got so enthusiastic about it. I said to the university, we should be doing something in this space. And it's what often happens in organizations. They said, cool, you do it.
Right.
So I created and launched a strategic design MBA program. So it was an executive MBA that integrated design thinking and how people learn strategy, leadership, finance, branding. And that was the final 6 years of my academic career. So I was a very entrepreneurial academic, and really, really loved my time doing that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And again, it makes you who you are today.
Yes.
So, one question I have for you is you did talk about the 7 rules for improvising at work. Is that something people are asking for today, or what is kind of the most common thing you're hearing clients today ask you for? Like, they want you to cover with their audiences? Because I mean, change and invention and creativity and innovation are absolutely essential and hugely present in our world today. So what are you hearing? Do they want those 7 rules for improvising at work, or do they want something different?
Well, it's funny that you're asking because I literally had a call with a potential client today who is really interested in the future of work is jazz talk, which is one of the talks that
Yeah.
I still get invited to give a variation of that. Those 7 rules for improvising really come from the work of Frank Barrett. So Frank Barrett is a jazz musician. He's an academic based, I believe, in San Diego. And those 7 principles are things that Frank Barrett identified as being present in the way jazz musicians work and
Mm,
are super helpful if we transpose them and transfer them over to org design and org management. So there are things like embracing mistakes, soloing and supporting,
mm,
hallway moments, um, something he calls retrospective sense making, the ability to draw from the past. And it's a really brilliant heuristic because it helps people to understand that they really have to shift away from micromanagement and kind of what I call a permission slip culture to building what I call more fluid, flexible structures. It's not that you want to do away with structure. We need the boundaries, but we need to know what the boundaries are so we can press up against them and we can extend them. So the sorts of topics that I generally get invited to speak on are around the idea of like how do we navigate ambiguity and how does creativity in a very applied practical way help us to do that. And I also get invited a lot to talk about the future of work from a slightly different perspective, that we know that the technology is ubiquitous, but what else in terms of the human element can we optimize to really flourish in the future of work?
So you have a pretty positive outlook for the future of work. And what are you most excited about right now that you're seeing happen, or that you're proud of, business cultures doing and creating and innovating? What is it that's really got you excited about the future right now?
It's actually, when as a foresight practitioner, foresight is less to do with predicting the future, and it's much more about being hyper observant of the present.
Hmm.
Because when you are super observant of the present, then you begin to identify patterns and you can dream up and imagine what might come next. And so, actually, what's really interesting to me, what I think more organizations should be paying attention to, is what not just millennials, but what centennials are doing to engage with each other. So we have a 21-year-old daughter who's a member of Gen Z. She's a centennial. And the centennial generation sometimes gets a bad rap because they're digital natives. They can be perceived to constantly be on their phones.
Right.
But one of the things that we must pay attention to is what we might learn from the ways that they are engaging in technology. So this is something, for example, I'm still learning about.
Right.
But if you look at a lot of the game design that high school students and middle school students are really involved in, so using platforms like Twitch, what they're really engaging in is improvisation, is co-creation, using their imagination in ways that we don't get the same sorts of 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 opportunities to do. And so rather than fight against that, when we think about future of work, I think it's very important to understand what from those environments could we integrate that could help us do a much more imaginative and innovative job at building consumer insight, at building our own team culture. The
Hmm.
other thing that I'm really interested in and excited about is exploring more the neuroscience of creativity, the neuroscience of intuition. This is an example of zigging away from where others are zagging and really exploring embodied work. Um, I'm not sure yet how all that will play out, but I do discern, and what I'm observing and what I experience among my clients is that in these virtual environments where we have more opportunity to let technology take over basic tasks, we must pay attention to more embodied work to really understand how intuition can be optimized. So, what if, for example, more of our KPIs were tied to curiosity and intuition? What if we incentivized creativity? What if we figured out ways to design technology? And I know there's some platforms out there that really helped us to step away from the laptop and from the phone to do some of the things that I advocate, such as daydreaming and taking walks and being really strategic in the sorts of breaks that we use, so that we can really energize our brains to have the much more dynamic neural synapses that make us think in a much more generative way.
Wow. That's
That's what
amazing.
that's something that excites me.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we do need the zigs and the zags because, it seems like in the world that we live in, there's a lot of, oh, that worked for that person and this is the new hot trend. And so everybody goes and does that. And then we find out later it wasn't such a good idea. And,
Exactly.
people are kind of sheepishly, following articles or, thought leaders who may be outdated or may be closed-minded or think they know everything there is to know. And certainly people like you are welcome on our stages and in our media, in our books, in our magazines, and I love the content you put out. This has been such a great conversation. I feel like we literally just scratched the surface a little bit, and I'm really looking forward to you being in California so I can see your keynote in person. And
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that. So thank you so much, Natalie, for coming on. This has been absolutely awesome. You are amazing, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. This was awesome. I appreciate it.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.